welcome to another video. This time we're going to be talking about HouseBroken, second episode titled Who Did This? And Who Did This is actually a Honey featured episode, and kind of again because she's the main character. She refuses to go out after the groomer who her owner Jill takes her to gives her an embarrassing haircut. And Diablo is introduced to a new creature, and he breaks like the number one rule of being a pet. And there's another kind of side plot where Chief and Lyle, also known as the Gray One, hang out, and then Elsa then kind of breaks them up, I guess. So, to be honest here, I actually quite like this one because for a few reasons. I'll start with the two subplots. I think the gray one and Lyle's is surprisingly pretty fun. It starts out with them talking more in therapy, then they go and hang out, watch TV together, and then somehow Elsa comes in and breaks them up. But then they kind of just and then they kind of get back together later on. It's not really much, but I was actually surprised about how just quick and fun it was. It didn't really overstay its welcome. It's a nice addition. I mean, could have done without it, but it certainly wasn't bad. As for Diablo's subplot, him breaking the number one rule of being a pet, it was surprisingly pretty good because we haven't got much introduction to Diablo, even though in the first episode he feels like he's not welcome to the group. In this episode, they sort of he's like fully welcome into the group, which is nice. But I also like the idea of Diablo end up biting the baby, and then all the pets tell him that's not what he's supposed to do, and then he makes friends with him. It's surprisingly pretty adorable. And then we're getting to the main star of the show. It does start out a little poorly with Chief getting sprayed by a skunk. I kind of didn't appreciate that. And then it kind of brings it back in the end, which I kind of didn't like again because I never thought it was funny. But it's not a bad setup because it does bring in more. It does tie into the overall structure of the story and how it gets started, because Chief getting skunked ends up how Honey and Chief end up going to the groomers first to clean Chief up and then give Honey a makeover, and her makeover ends up being so embarrassing. So instead of her looking like a poodle, her head looks like her hair looks like a square, and it's pretty embarrassing. And as a result, she doesn't want to go out. She ends up holding in her waste because dogs are supposed to go outside to empty their waste. That's kind of why they call it, the show's called HouseBroken, because HouseBroken means that HouseBroken means pets who are trained to defecate or empty their waste in certain areas. So it's pretty obvious to see why the show is called HouseBroken, because of that, and also because of the pets. So then, because Honey can't empty her waste, she ends up emptying it in the house, and then she gets all she kind of gets all like worried that she's going to get scolded by her owner because she did something that her owner would never approve of, because according to, in her own words, she's her princess, I believe. And it goes a little more in depth than what it offers, mainly because I think that it explores a kind of more deeper theme when they go into therapy after that.
Well, somebody did.
I don't recollect, but then again...
It was here when we got here.
Was it your human?
No, it was me! I did it! I pooped in the house like a bad girl!
Yikes.
Indoor number 2 is the number 1 no-no.
Yeah, you think I don't know that, Elsa? I know that, Elsa! Jill is more than a mother. She's my best friend, my queen, and my food source all in one. I can't bear to disappoint her. Well, things don't just disappear, Max. Unless you're talking about Jill's faith in me.
Dr. Honey, don't be so hard on yourself. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not. But testing the bounds of Jill's forgiveness is hard on both of us. That's very sweet, Tchotchke, but Chief already offered. I just have to face the music.
And it's surprisingly pretty sweet at the end too, because Chief ends up taking the blame for Honey and says that he was the one that pooped in the house, so Honey can remain the perfect one in Jill's eyes. And it was surprisingly pretty sweet too, because even though the coyote, he ends up reappearing, and him and Honey decide to go on a date, even though he howls later on in the final act of the episode, Honey ends up thanking Chief instead, and she goes out to the outside doghouse where Chief is punished, and they sleep there for the night, which was surprisingly very, very sweet.
Knock, knock. Is there room in there for me?
Really? You want to sleep in the bad boy house with me?
Yeah, it'll be fun. Like a date.
Doghouse date. I like it.
Thank you for taking the blame for my no-no.
They're our no-nos, babe.
Well, it was really decent
I
of
gotta
you.
get to sleep now. If I lose another day, the whole week is shot.
That's all I was going to.
Okay, good night.
So, to be honest about the humor, I this was kind of like last time. It had some funny moments. It wasn't great, but I think this time the story is much more balanced. It's much more well-paced and structured, as opposed to the pilot where it kind of felt a little all over the place. I feel like maybe the pilot episode was kind of the one that they sent in, or they may have kind of sent something in before the show was greenlit, and then once they realized the show was greenlit, then they probably started making new episodes off the batch, which were... So maybe that's kind of my prediction. I'm hoping the rest of the episodes are just as good as this as well. I hope this isn't a one-off, because I actually thought this was quite good. Except for some of the humor wasn't that great. So, overall, Who Did This was surprisingly a pretty good episode of HouseBroken, and it's a good sign for a show to quickly find its footing. I'm not saying that it has yet, but if it keeps delivering episodes at least of this quality, I can say that hopefully it does find its footing by the end of the first season. I'm pretty optimistic about it, because as I said, it does, even though the shows does have that crude, crass humor, or as you call it, juvenile humor, its focus can sometimes get a little more in depth and have some deep moments, like in the pilot when Honey was thinking about Big Cookie, for example, and here you have them having conversations about what to not do when you're pets. It's surprisingly pretty nice, because people always wonder what they think, what their pets are thinking at the moment, and even though they may not have humanized traits like these ones, where they're aware of things. It's surprisingly I think it's a pretty decent depiction of how you might think your pets are thinking when you're not home, and I liked it. So overall, Who Did This is surprisingly a pretty good episode, despite some of the humor wasn't that great, but other than that, it's a pretty nice start. I hope more episodes are like this. So, those are my thoughts on episode 2 of HouseBroken, Who Did This? What did you think about this episode? Maybe you liked it more than me. Maybe you hated it for some reason. I honestly don't know. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.